Hello and welcome to the University of Guelph's 2021 Rural Romp. The Rural Romp is an annual tradition for the Rural and Planning Development Department at the University of Guelph. It's an opportunity to showcase, highlight, and celebrate rural communities and rural planning. This year, we are excited to celebrate the 6th year of this event with our Rural Heritage theme. Today, we're joined by an amazing panel of rural heritage enthusiasts and experts. Each will share their story with you, and as we go through the next hour and a bit, we will explore the challenges in conserving and protecting rural heritage and get a bit of advice from our speakers on pursuing a career in the rural planning field. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge our responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we live, learn, and work. I acknowledge that Toronto, where I work and live, is the traditional territory of many Indigenous peoples, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And, as a University of Guelph student, the land I learn on is situated on treaty land that is also steeped in rich Indigenous history, as ancestral land to the Attawandaron people and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And it is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. As we touch on themes of rural heritage today, I want us to be aware and mindful of the legacies of Indigenous people who have stewarded this land for time immemorial, and the diversity of cultures present across rural Canada today. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you to everyone who is joining us here from across the nation and across the globe. We had a few recording errors, so I'll briefly introduce the first two speakers. Karen Lang is a branch rep of the ACO Muskoka. As a seasonal Muskoka resident, practicing artist, and children's book author and illustrator, she has been actively involved in all aspects of the Windermere History Project. And joining her today is Barbara Dutton, who returned to Windermere in 1993 after years as an emergency nurse. Her great-grandparents, Francis and Elizabeth Forge, were one of the first settlers to arrive in the 1860s. She joined the local branch of the Women's Institute and in a few short years became the Tweedsmuir coordinator, collecting and recording community history. Here's a short video that explains the Windermere History Project.
The Windermere History Project is a collaborative initiative of ACO Muskoka, Archives of the Windermere Women's Institute, and Muskoka Chautauqua. What you can see today is not much different than what's visible here from this aerial photo of 1930.
The village is a very special place in our family, and I know it has huge importance to many, many families who've got much, much longer histories here in Windermere than we do. And, coming from Toronto, I'm so conscious of how, special places can just disappear overnight and you just don't know why or how, and you haven't done anything to prevent it. So our interest in recording the history of Windermere is to at least record what we have. We need to understand what's here, and so that's what this project is about, is just gathering all the information and gathering the collective memory of the people who live and vacation here, and to try to put that together into the stories. The stories might feed drama, they might feed local plays, they might be a book, they might be walking tours, it could be all kinds of things, but we're looking at the place physically and in terms of everybody's memories.
There were 3 areas of focus and specific resources at inception. ACO Muskoka to provide support, direction, and database development. The Archives of the Windermere Women's Institute, which allowed us access to a myriad of community records of the history of Windermere and the area. And Muskoka Chautauqua, which is a creative-based community program with an origin in Windermere as early as 1916. You can see from this diagram how the 3 organizations work collaboratively together. ACO Muskoka, that works towards data collection for built heritage, cultural landmarks, and the heritage designation process. The Archives, which is a collection of local history, heritage, and community stories from both permanent and seasonal residents. Muskoka Chautauqua offers an arts-based community program promoting local theater, artists, musicians, and authors. The collaborative work of these three organizations helps promote community engagement, pride of ownership, and the sustainable investment in the community.
There's a lot still there, and to say it's, it's under people's beds, in back cupboards, and they're thinking, well, we'll have to sell our place, so we'll throw it out. Nobody wants it. The kids aren't interested. We want it here. We'll keep it for them until they do get interested in it.
I use the word a kickstart. Mm-hmm. We don't want it to fade away, and it just needs a little help to pull it up a little bit.
Now is the time, because if it doesn't happen now, some of those stories could be lost and we won't really understand what the significance is of the heritage.
And it's very hard to create that sense of place once it's gone. There is a sense of place here.
All the things that sat out here and talked about, and the coming of the automobile, the coming of electricity, airplanes, the Boer War. I mean, just imagine. There's all that emotion, all those people, and they're all gone. And sometimes you feel like, their spirits are around.
Sorry, it was a bit jumpy. I hope I got the message across about what we're doing. Just to give you a bit of background, the Windermere History Project started about 2.5, 3 years ago, and we kind of approached it from the point of view of really not knowing what we were going to do, but our questions we were asking were, how do we help preserve this village? How do we generate a sense of community and interest and an ownership, and do that on an ongoing basis? And the third important one for us was, how do we prevent a developer from coming in with a plan that wouldn't be compatible with a rural heritage type of role or point of view? So we really have found over the 2.5 years we've been working on this that the collaborative work we've done with these three groups is really the key to the success and ongoing success of it. It's the heritage, the history, and the facts, like collected and archived, developing the Muskoka built platform, which is ongoing. But it's the anecdotal stories and the community engagement that we feel are really critical for the engagement of the community, for the build out, the strength of the structure, and the preservation of the rural community of Windermere. And I'd like to point out too that I think the relevance of Muskoka Chautauqua to the community has been very significant. It's not only from their historical link to Windermere, but also it serves as an ongoing way to engage and celebrate the community's sense of place and its personality of the community going forward in the future. So I want to invite now Barb Dutton, who is from Windermere, and she's from the Windermere Women's Institute. And just to give you all some background on what she and a group have been doing at the archives. I mean, it's really important to rural heritage, but what they've done has been integral to our project. So I'm going to turn it over to Barb now, and I'm hoping you're there somewhere.
You're on mute there, Barb.
Hi, I'm Barbara Dutton. Women's Institute branches across Canada have been collecting community history since the late 1930s. These collections are called Windermere Histories, and they're named after the then Governor General's wife, Lady Windermere, who had suggested the project. These volumes contain a wealth of community information. Some have already been digitized and are on the Ontario Women's Institute website. As our own Windermere History collection continued to grow, we decided in 2007 to start an archive in a basement room of our community center, which was once our one-room schoolhouse. We got permission and with a Trillium grant purchased filing cabinets, computer equipment, and a database program. Our goals were to collect, preserve, and make readily available the history of our community. A group of 6 of us have been working away ever since, 1 day a week during the winter months. We're all seniors and are enjoying this as a new second career. Working with ACO and Muskoka Aqua has helped us to obtain even more contacts and information from both our local and seasonal neighbors. We feel it's essential to get as much information as possible before it disappears in order to understand how this area developed. This knowledge can then be shared and help influence changes in the future. I'll hand it back.
So that's the essence of our project, and well.
All right. Thank you so much, Karen and Barb. Thank you for joining us. Sorry about the video quality. I was worried it might be a little choppy, but I hope it was clear enough and everyone got a good sense of, what this project is all about. We're going to move on to our next speaker, Jennifer from PopSilos. I'll invite you to introduce yourself and let me know when you want me to put your presentation on.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to share. I'm always excited to share about our project. So thank you. And the project took root in Russell, Ontario, which is a region that is mostly Franco-Ontarian, so Franco-Canadian. I did live in Guelph for some time for a job I had, and many people would tell me, "Oh, she's from Quebec, you're from Quebec." And I never thought I had an accent when I spoke in Ottawa, because I guess there's a lot of bilingual people. But anyways, I might invent some English words in this presentation, but it should, if you have any questions, just go ahead. You can go ahead and put my slide up, Holly. Thanks. So the first slide is just to present what our project looks like. So PopSilos is an exterior, an outdoors museum, we'll call it, a sensorial experience. It's urban art on farm silos, and our essence is to surprise people with urban art. So it kind of contradicts with the rural environment, but the rural environment really becomes part of the artwork as well. So and part of the statement. We have actually, you can move on to the next slide, Holly. I'll begin to tell you just a little bit more about how the idea took shape. I come from Prescott Russell. I live in Ottawa now, but I grew up in Castleman, which is one of the towns, one of the municipalities in the region. And it's basically from the region regroups 8 municipalities, and from point A to point from one point to the other, it probably spans about 80 kilometers. And it's mostly farmland, mostly Franco-Canadians. And what else can I say about the region? It's mostly a passing zone also between Ottawa and Montreal. And so along the Highway 417. And how the idea came about is I took a year and traveled the world with my now husband. And we were inspired by some of the travels we did in rural areas. And I don't know if that's because there was a lot of people seem to take the time to exchange, and our conversations were meaningful. And it's not that we didn't like the chaos of the cities; we much liked it as well. We loved it as well, but But the rural experiences were just, I guess maybe gave us time to think more, I'm not sure. But when we came back home, we thought we live in this beautiful area, and how can we communicate this to people, to the world? How can we showcase it? How can we shed some light on how beautiful these fields are, for instance, changing fields actually every season. And so the painting they paint is different every season. So how can we do this? And when we were in Scotland, we heard about the Kelburn Castle, which is a historical, it's a castle. It's absolutely beautiful. One of its facades is covered in graffiti art, and it just makes such a strong statement, a pop of color on something that's rooted in such such tradition that it's quite surprising, and it brings about a flow of emotions that's quite fun. So I thought, how can we do that and bring attention to our rural agricultural communities in Prescott Russell? So then we were driving around and we saw that there were silos, and we thought these are monumental canvases and maybe we should paint these. And so you can go ahead, Holly, and present the video, which tells a little bit, it showcases really the essence and the exchange between the farmer and the artist. And the subtitles are in English, the video is in French, so enjoy.
Okay. Hopefully video quality and audio is okay.
I hope so.
Tu as des grands champs de partout, et là tu vois un silo de couleurs qui s'élève dans l'espace. Il y a quelque chose d'assez extraordinaire.
C'est pas juste l'histoire d'un mur ou l'histoire, c'est l'histoire d'une famille.
C'est de l'art. L'agriculture aussi, c'est de l'art. C'est pas juste du travail. Tu coupes un chien, c'est beau. Ici, j'entends que les oiseaux, les chants, le vent, et ça change complètement d'une ville.
Au final, les mains que j'ai pu voir, les mains de ces agriculteurs, les mains que j'ai pu peindre sur le silo, Je trouve une très grande ressemblance au final aux mains du peintre qui, les deux sont des mains ridées de passion.
Okay, so there's a little bit of a summary about it was those are actually the two silos that were produced and added last summer to our tour. So we do this to bring rural heritage to light, but also to tell the story of the region, to tell the artist's story, to give them a canvas to paint on, to speak with, and basically invite visitors to come to the region. And we've made a product out of it in that it's a self-guided tour. So the information on the artwork is online, and people can visit these 7 silos. They can, in the summertime, you can go to the farmers to the farmers' places, and you can visit. Some of them have businesses like a winery or a maize, a corn maze. Some people sell local products, and what we do is we also invite visitors to stop on the way to visit other local producers or artisans. And we also have two gems, Bowes Brewery. I don't know if you know that brewery in Vane Creek Hill, and the St. Albert Cheese Cooperative. So both of them are kind of pillars, or economic pillars, and everybody knows them. They have festivals. They have Oktoberfest. They have the Curd Festival. So gems in our area, and they're our partners and private industry partners, and their food and beverage stops on the way. So if people want to stop on the way, they can stop there. And they're also great places where people can buy local products. You can move on to the next slide, Holly. I wanted to take you through an example of before and after, and how how the murals tell a story. And so PopSilos, how we initiated the project, it was in 2017, and it was to celebrate Canada's 150th anniversary. And so we had decided on 5 themes that celebrated Canada's history, and these were themes of Canada's 150th. Last year, when we produced, we chose 2 themes that we thought related to the project and to the area, and we chose farms that we thought could tell their own story through these themes as well. So this is the farm in Castleman. It's called the Drouin Farm. And this is a before picture, and the theme we chose this year was the sowing. And you can move on to the next slide, and I'll explain the story with the mural. This is the after picture. You can't see the full circumference of the silo, but in the video you saw the rooster. That's on the other side of the silo here. So when we go ahead and choose to write a story, paint the story, the artist will, well, first of all, PopSilos will take a look at the farm, we'll meet with the producers and sort of inquire about their story and why they love the region and what's their story. So then we'll arrange for a meeting with the artist, and they'll talk about the story. And the artist this year, which was absolutely great, and we're going to repeat, the artist lived on site in sort of a trailer. And so for 4 weeks of production time, there's that time for the exchange to happen, and where the artist really learns about the environment and the family's story. When we start, there's a sketch that's done, and it's 95% agreed upon and done, because we need to plan in order for the mural to finish in time and be on budget. But everything around and the details within those small details that within the mural kind of come about between the artists and the farmers and the community that comes and visits the silos while they're in production. A lot of people come and see, and families as well. I mean, if I show something to my producers, they've often shown the artwork to, you know, their 25 closest friends, and they're like, okay, we have the feedback. So it's quite fun. But I wanted to tell you the story here. Is our theme was the sewing, and the farm we chose has started many entrepreneurial ventures. They're really a symbol also for la francophonie, so Franco-Canadians in Prescott-Russell. And the sowing means to sow a seed, to plant something. It means life. It means a journey. And so we felt that this farm really related to that theme, and in a sense that they've reinvented themselves time and time again. This is the 5th generation of family farmers on this farm, and the artist chose to depict this through many sets of hands. And so he chose to do, in the composition he put 4, and it's really like the hands are tossing the seed to each other. And it really, the seed is elevated to the sky, because it's like, this is the, this is what's important. This is what grows. This is what's important to protect. This is what's important to help grow. And the seed doesn't always mean a plant. It can also mean any project that you have. And since this farm was a very entrepreneurial family, it just felt like this is their story. They plant seeds in many ways. And in many ways, the PopSilos story also tries to connect with the community. And so you and I, everyone, we all try to plant different seeds in our lives and help them grow. So that's part of it. And the plants interlaced between the fingers are plants that the farmers, they do cash crops also, this farm. And so there's wheat, there's soy, there's also a maple leaf that you can see on one of the hands. And that's because they also have a sugar shack. So they do sell their maple syrup. They're also a catering company. They also have, in the pandemic, they had this huge screen and they opened a drive-in on their lot to take advantage of the situation, in the sense that they had to reinvent their business because they used to do events and hosting, and they did this instead, and the community decided to partake in it. So it was a great project. There are many little stories also. The river is in the shape of a horseshoe. That's because the land around the farm, the river does horseshoe around the property. And so this is a symbol also. And something that was very interesting, and if I could do another silo on this theme, is the presence of women on farms, and that would be super interesting to think about portraying. One of the farmers was very important. He said, "I'd love my mom to have some sort of a symbol on the silo." And so there's a wild rose in the third hand from the bottom. And that's the rose that the farmer picked from one of his rose bushes and brought to the artist and said, "Maybe you could paint this in the hand, because it will remind me of her presence and her role on the farm." And that would be interesting to portray. So there's that. There's also a representation of francophones, because this family hosted a mega show when, I think for over 10 years or something like that, I could be mistaken, where it was a live show outdoors, and it was theater that would tell the story and song, almost like a Broadway show, but outdoors, to tell the story of people from Prescott-Russell, the Franco-Canadian community. And there's also stories when I talk about the exchange between the farmer and the artist. The farmers, they show their land, they share everything, and they said, "Hey, you should go on the river, you should go, and you should just have fun, take a break." So the artist did. He went to the Canadian Tire and he bought a raft and went out on the river, and with a friend, and he actually, how do you say that? Turned over a chabiré, like he, anyways, it flipped. The raft flipped, and so, anyways, it was quite an experience. And the artist actually painted himself on the silo, also flipped in his little raft in the river. So, all this to say that there are many moments in which the artist and the farmer come together and live these moments, and both are. The silo is kind of a souvenir. A legacy of those 4 weeks of intense, let's talk about what we have in common. So each silo has a story like that. and represents the producers and the family. In our first round of production, we had 5 silos in which the community, we did cultural mediation, but we couldn't quite do that in our COVID year of production. So this is in a nutshell the story of one silo. You can go ahead to the next slide. I don't think I have much time for my presentation left, so I'm going to go ahead and just tell you that it's a great puzzle to make these things happen. And the one thing I love is that all the farmers and producers are entrepreneurial, and things aren't ever treated as problems, but more challenges, and they're always up for finding solutions. Wonderful to work with. And key to being able to capture that story that's authentic, true to the community and true to the producer, is really to bring these people together. And it's a real puzzle in terms of finding the surfaces, the farmers who are open-minded and want to work on an artistic project like this, to make it so that it's touristically viable and be able to present it on a map. And then finally, artists who can actually take all that information in and make it something that is meaningful. And money. we need a lot of money. So the community came together. We have 14 local partners, and the federal government also supported us in all our rounds of production. And so we're really happy to have that support, and we hope to garner more support to be able to produce even more silos and tell our story a little bit further, maybe across Canada, because it's a very unique way and it makes our region a destination. So that's I think that's my last slide. Yes, so I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I can talk forever about this project. So I'm hoping that I gave you a bit of a synopsis, and I'll take questions later.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jen. I used to work out at South Nation Conservation, so I remember seeing some of these.
Oh wow, excellent!
For lunch to St. Albert's, and
yes.
But yeah, thank you so much, and we'll move along onto our next speaker. We have Rob Pajot from the National Canada Trust, National Trust Canada. I'll let him introduce himself. But
sure, we can be natural. Sure. Thanks, thanks, Holly. And you can pop up my presentation at any time. So thank you, Holly Semport, and your whole team for inviting me to participate in this great panel. And Jennifer, awesome project. I can't wait in the discussion to hear more about it. Really, it encapsulates a lot of really interesting themes that we're seeing across the country. On the good news side. So that's really, really cool. Look forward to chatting in the conversation to come. So yes, I'm Rob Pajot from the National Trust for Canada here in Ottawa on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe First Nation. And I thought in this first little 10 minutes, I would talk about some of the things that I've been seeing at the National Trust for Canada, sort of a national perspective on some of the themes that we're seeing about rural heritage, with a focus on the successes, because we're going to be talking about the challenges and the bad news in a few minutes. The second question that we're going to be so I thought we'd focus in the beginning on the good news. So maybe the next slide, Holly. First, on the personal note, I'm from Ottawa, but both my parents are actually from Windsor, the Windsor region, and another Franco-Ontarien, Jennifer, another Francophone community at the south end of the province. My dad grew up on River Canard, Rivière-au-Canard, on just 2 doors down from his cousin's farm, which is the Pajot family farm that has been actually in our family since 1862. So almost 260 years, or one of, if not the oldest, continuously farmed property in the same family in Ontario. But I am a child of the suburbs. I grew up here in Ottawa, in the suburb in Ottawa. But when I was about 6 years old, both my parents bought this property, which is just about an hour from here in the West Quebec. It's about a 90-acre farm with a 110-year-old now farmhouse, which I now operate. So I operate this farm, although it mostly deals with just dealing with the buildings, and we have a farmer that does the work in the fields. But so I have a connection with rural heritage. I'm also love going on rural romps myself. So the title of this event is actually really appropriate. One of the things about what I've seen since we've owned this property now for about almost 50 years illustrates some of the challenges that rural heritage has across the country. Since we've owned this property in the Pontiac, I have personally seen so many properties left fallow, fields left fallow that have become forests in my lifetime. Historic houses and farmsteads left abandoned and eventually demolished or burnt down. The old log post office has rotted to the ground. So, and the area around us has depopulated. So these are some of the challenges that we'll be talking about a little bit later, but it's also, I've seen it with my own eyes, even in my very short young lifetime. Next slide, Holly. So National Trust for Canada. Many of you will be familiar with a lot of our work through the years in our projects and our advocacy for historic places and all the resources that we put out to support community groups trying to revitalize and maintain and save their historic places. But next slide, Holly. What I thought I would do is talk a little bit about some of the programs that we've been involved with over the years that have been specifically having an impact on rural and remote areas in Canada. One of the biggest, our largest and earliest programs was the Main Street program in Canada. It originated with us as an organization, and we used to be called the Heritage Canada Foundation. That's if you know us from our previous name, when we were doing the Main Street program. And it was really innovative at its time in recognizing that it's not about the buildings. It's not just about the historic buildings. For the future of them, it really involves a multi-point approach. You know, there was really an emphasis, an integrated approach with tourism, economy, arts and culture. It really recognized that the future of these main streets, traditional main streets in small towns, really depended on that multiple approach, that multiple pronged approach. So that was a huge success and has gone on to be really adapted by the private sector. And there were provincial programs across the country. In the United States, it's still running strong, a very huge program. And it evolved into another program that we had briefly at the National Trust called the Heritage Regions Project, which took almost a cultural landscape approach to this, applying the same principles of this to larger rural regions. Next slide, Holly. But that's sort of in the past, but on an ongoing basis, a lot of our work deals with rural heritage. You may know us for our endangered places list, which used to be one annual list that we would put out there, but now we're taking a different approach as of this year. And so we're doing it monthly, highlighting a specific place every month. And this one that was just 2 weeks ago, I believe, is an example of a rural place of faith at risk in the north of Ontario. So we have in the past tried to shine the national spotlight on rural heritage issues, either at specific places or, as in the case of the covered bridges in New Brunswick, more of a thematic of a type of historic place. Next slide, Holly. One of our other programs that we do is we offer these small coaching grants. It's sort of, we work with community groups across the country. It's an application process. And we have found that we have worked with these small community groups, and a lot of them have come from rural areas, small communities in rural areas for rural heritage places. Because part of the challenges of rural places is capacity, having access to expertise. So that's one of the things that we've been doing. And it's been a huge success with some great examples from the Stone Church on the right to in Nova Scotia and Cape Breton to Glenallendale, an amazing site in PEI. Next slide, please, Holly. But those are sort of some of the challenges of those two programs. But we also love to highlight the successes in our national awards program. Our awards try not to be just about the pretty restoration projects that are often, lots of big money, but we also really try to emphasize highlighting projects that demonstrate how historic places contribute to their communities. So we're really trying to emphasize that. And because of that particular spin we have on our program, our awards program, we have often our winners are from rural or smaller communities. Here are a few examples. Next slide, Holly. One of the other things that we learned, the National Trust, we developed this great crowdfunding platform, which is kind of a mashup between Craft Hockeyville and GoFundMe. It's both a crowdfunding and a competition platform. When we're working hard to get up a prize pool. Last time we did it was about $500,000 prize pool that we got from donations, that we then had community groups competing their conservation project against each other to win the prize pool. And people, when they could vote, but also donate at the same time, and each dollar counted as another vote, and the most votes won the prize pool. So we had communities fighting it out against each other, which was really great. But we thought, okay, is this going to be unfair for rural communities because we had larger big city groups doing this? But we were amazed to see that our grand prize winners were most often small community groups, because they were able to rally their communities around their projects and did amazing work. Groups that had never crowdsourced or never crowdfunded, had very little social media savvy, stepped up to the plate and learned how to do it, which was really, really cool. Next slide, Holly. One of the other things we've been also involved with at the National Trust is various research projects. Just this past year, in collaboration with partners at the Faith in the Common Good, Ontario Not-for-Profit Network, and funded by the Ontario Trillium Foundation, looking at, this was specific on faith buildings, but it had a strong rural lens to it. It's one of these important issues that is places of faith across the country, but the fact that it really impacts rural Canadians even more, because rural places of faith play a very important community role. They're the third space in so many communities, and these loss of those spaces are having a huge impact on the nonprofit sector and the small community groups across big cities, but also even more so in Ontario, in rural areas. This was focused on Ontario, but this actually gave us good data that we're going to be able to use for advocacy and further research. So we're involved also at a research lens. And one of the other things that we did a couple of years ago, in which Sam Porna worked with me on, was we did also a national survey on rural heritage that led ahead of a couple of national roundtables that we did on rural heritage. And maybe I'll come back to some of those challenges and things that came up out of that work when we have our conversation. Next slide, Holly. But what I really wanted to talk about, and just very quickly, are some of the success stories that we've seen, because there is so much as you will hear about a lot of the challenges and issues and threats to rural heritage places. And I'm sure many people that are listening in are facing so many of these. I thought I'd just talk about a few good news stories, and we've seen many from across the country. We've been involved with some of them. But next slide, Holly. I thought I would talk just quickly about three little ones that we were not involved with as the National Trust, but I just love telling some of these stories. This one, and some of you may have heard of this in Keydive, Saskatchewan, very small community that, in fact, I think it was in 2002, they lost their official status as a town, and the population was down to about 10 residents. They had lost other buildings in the town, and the few remaining residents did not want to lose their big, and it's a beautiful brick schoolhouse, which was the dominant, big building in this very small community. They managed, without an email address, without a website presence, without a newsletter because they didn't have money for stamps, these 6-8 elderly people had so much gumption, and through their connections ran a number of very small fundraising events, but were so good at it, got the attention of the municipal or regional government, who gave them a loan guarantee in order to get a bunch of work done. And the loan got paid off extremely quickly, because these women, mostly women and men, did amazing work. They raised about $150,000 to put a new roof on, do upgrades to actually upgrade the kitchen, waterproof the basement, do a number of critical things. So now this little schoolhouse still functions as their community center. There's great quilting clubs, but they also rent it out and have an income stream from it. So one of the themes, gumption, rural gumption, is something not to be dismissed. Next slide, Holly. An example from Quebec, in Saint-Pacôme on the South Shore, close to just beyond Quebec City. And if any of you have traveled around Quebec, you know that in rural Quebec, the Catholic Church and the steeple of those churches are so important to define the landscape. But like other places of faith across the country, shrinking congregations in those big buildings with lots of repairs needed are at risk. What they ended up doing, which was really, really cool, is they developed an innovative partnership with, in a neighboring community, there was a small startup high-tech firm called Inno3D. You can flip to the next screen, Holly. This company wanted a demonstration project. They were trying to develop small-scale vertical container vertical farming. They were trying to proof their technology in order to develop this for remote communities and also specifically for high north communities that have limited access to food. So this was, you know, they were wanting to proof their technology. So they ended up forming a not-for-profit corporation as a spin-off to that iTech firm, purchased the church, and are actually using it because the vertical space was perfect for their needs. They're actually using it for their offices. The congregation still has a rent, and so they're still worshiping in this space, but it's also become, they're producing materials, right now I think it was mostly small lettuces and a number of smaller vegetables, but they're working on the technology. So it's also a local market. So providing in the wintertime fresh local greens. So again, great innovation, matching high-tech innovation, community needs, and a bigger picture about broader goals. And the heat from these things actually heat the church. Really kind of cool. Next slide. And which is my last one. This one isn't about this physical place. And those of you in around Prince Edward County and Sophiasburg, unless you happen to like 1970s or 80s kind of boring architecture, sorry. But the school in Sophiasburg was at risk because of the number of children attending it. So but the local community recognized that a loss of a school had a huge impact on their community. And I'm talking about this not because of the building, but because about the sustainability of the whole of the cultural landscape that is Prince Edward County, which if any of you have been there is quite amazing. That mix of agriculture, the now wine producing. And I like just telling this story because what they ended up doing is a not-for-profit group was set up to create the county food hub, which took over a whole wing of the school. So it is still another wing of it is still the school and functioning as the school, but the rest of it has been converted as this food hub, as an incubator for small industries, because there are so many small farmers starting up that are looking at different ways of producing or transforming their agricultural products into market goods. So here they're learning about how to process the things, how to be really creative, innovative. They're running programs, all kinds of really cool programs being run out of this space so that young families that are starting up as farmers are going to remain in the area and have kids that'll go to the school and support the local economy. So I just want to highlight it as an example, not specifically about heritage, but heritage writ larger, about how the sustainability of a community can be supported by innovative projects. So that's it. I look forward to some of the conversation about some of the challenges and other things. So thanks.
Great, thank you, Rob. We're looking forward to talking about some of the challenges coming up soon. But first, we'll introduce Emma and Shelley. Emma and Shelley are from ERA Architects, and they're going to chat a little bit about their work. So welcome.
Perfect. So I think you can just pull up our slides right away, Holly, and maybe jump to the second slide in the interest of time. So thanks, Sampoorna and Holly, for inviting us to speak with you today. We're super excited to be here. So as Holly mentioned, my name is Shelley Ludman. I'm an architect at ERA Architects, and I'm joined today by my heritage planning colleague, Emma Abramowicz, who is in one of the faces in the videos that I can't find on my screen, but that's okay. So ERA is a Toronto-based firm of about 100 people with satellite offices in both Ottawa and Montreal. And our team is made up primarily of planners, architects, historians, and conservation specialists. So we're really an incredibly multidisciplinary firm. And we specialize in heritage conservation and adaptive reuse. And one of our core interests is in connecting heritage to wider considerations of urban design and city building. So the range, oh, I just noticed, sorry, can you jump to the next slide? And maybe go full screen? Sorry, I just noticed that it wasn't moving ahead. Or maybe it was sharing in the wrong window, perhaps. I got so excited about what I was talking about, I like didn't even notice the slides. So that's
a couple
4.
back, a couple back.
Yeah. If you could jump to 2. I'm not sure what's happening.
This is a giveaway, everyone. So
I know.
Get excited.
Do you want me to try sharing if something's not working properly?
Yeah, because it looks full screen for me. Sorry. I don't know.
No, that's okay. Okay, let me just pull it up super fast. This is going to speak to the organization of my files. Okay. I think we're good. Oh, you have to enable screen sharing, please.
Try now.
Yeah, give me 1 sec. Just trying to ensure you're seeing the right thing. Okay, perfect. Okay, can everyone see that? Yeah. Okay. So as I was saying, the range of projects that we work on is quite vast, and you can sort of get a glimpse of it on this slide, but I encourage you all to sort of check out our website just in the interest of time. So at ERA, we've been approached by farmstead owners, often farms with heritage status, when the owners want to make change on their sites. And this change can range from, a subdivision plan all the way to an adaptive reuse of, say, into a brewery or an event venue. And today, Emma and I are here, and we'll be speaking to you about the question of what it means to conserve the heritage and character of Ontario's historically agricultural places as these communities continue to evolve. So I'll hand it off to Emma for the next handful of slides, and then I'll sort of pull it back at the end. And just to confirm, is everyone sort of seeing this okay?
Seeing it, and I don't know if it can go full screen, Shelley.
I don't, let's just keep it at this.
Okay.
I'm worried if I try to do that. Yeah, sorry.
Sounds good, no problem. Hi everyone, I'm Emma. And just as a quick backgrounder, when we're talking about the Ontario farmstead, we're primarily talking about a very small chunk of Southern Ontario that was originally surveyed by the British colonial government in the late 1790s and early 1800s. Next slide. That survey established the concession lines and side roads that frame much of our suburban and rural fabric today. And between those concessions and side roads, there would typically be 5 200-acre farm lots with the farmhouses built close to the road and agricultural land beyond. Next slide. Here are a couple of sketches of what those farmsteads would have looked like in the late 1800s. And when you study these historic images and remnant properties, you start to notice a common set of typological features and layouts. Next slide. We've got the farmhouse, the barn, other outbuildings, maybe a silo, an entrance driveway framed by vegetation, often some front yard mature trees, rear agricultural fields, drive lanes to support agricultural activity, often a rear woodlot, windrows along the property edge, and historically an orchard near the farmhouse. And these are interesting because they really comprise a set of built-in landscape features that we might understand as a cultural landscape, a clear typological era of Southern Ontario's development that we still see remnants of today, if not fully intact sites. Next slide. So today, while we explore how to conserve that cultural landscape, there are a number of conservation challenges we come up against on historic farmstead sites. Next slide. The first and biggest is that many of these historically rural lands are located within policy-directed growth areas. The province of Ontario's growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe targets intensification in key places in order to reduce sprawl elsewhere, but many of those key places are peri-urban and they currently host historic farm properties. Municipal planning documents like official plans and secondary plans carry through the policy objectives laid out at a provincial level. So it's very common for us to be approached about historic farmsteads that are located in urban expansion secondary plan areas. And then we have to sort out what it looks like to conserve that large landscape arrangement in a place that's supposed to be urbanizing. Next slide. The second challenge is how to use the tools allotted by the Ontario Heritage Act for the conservation of farmstead properties. Heritage listing or individual designation is really well suited to small scale properties where the built resource might occupy much of the site. And by contrast, when we look at large scale landscapes, we need to think through a more nuanced approach that might allow for the effective reuse of these sites if the agricultural use is no longer viable or no longer supported by the other planning policy that's happening. So two key questions come up for us when we hear about municipal heritage designations of farmstead properties. One is whether the municipality should be listing or designating all the farm properties. If all of these properties are representative of valued agricultural heritage in these communities, how do we distinguish between the ones that should be conserved and the ones where it's less of a priority? Heritage designation needs to balance with other objectives, so it's not necessarily realistic that every single farmhouse gets retained. And then the second question is, when municipalities do designate, which involves identifying physical features or attributes that should be conserved, we often see these attributes focused on just the farmhouse buildings, things like the porch, the brick materials, the windows, but not necessarily the landscape features like the tree-lined driveway. For us, conservation would involve retention or interpretation of some of those landscape features as well. And it's harder to get a client of ours to do it when those features aren't included in the designation bylaw and mandated for conservation. Next slide. There's also this totally separate question about conserving agricultural land. And in Ontario, heritage legislation doesn't allow for the protected designation of uses, which is generally good because if a use is no longer viable, you shouldn't necessarily be made to continue it on a site you own. But there's complementary non-heritage legislation out there designed to conserve agricultural land in Ontario, including the Greenbelt Act, and we can talk about the political issues in a separate discussion, and options for property owners like conservation easement agreements, which can provide for the continuation of agricultural uses. For us, though, in our work, our scope in the heritage planning field tends to be about the remnant physical features and how those get conserved. Next slide. So there are 4 common farmstead project types we get at ERA. Next slide. First, we have clients who come to us wanting to replace the farmstead entirely. So where that's permitted, we still may sometimes recommend interpretive design features to conserve the site's history as it evolves. Second, we have adaptive reuse in a low-scale context where the farm itself may be subdivided, but the farmhouse and hopefully some landscape features are conserved. And on these projects, it's key for us to look for opportunities to retain elements like greenery or connection to the historic concession road, for example. Third, and this is a scary one, we have adaptive reuse in a high density context, usually in the second era of the farmstead's redevelopment, where it's now part of an urban intensification zone. And this is really the biggest kind of farmstead challenge we're facing these days, how to tell rural agricultural stories and support farmhouse buildings on what are effectively now going to be downtown sites. And then there's the fourth type, reuse with a continued rural or agricultural program. And honestly, the first 3 are really about a change entirely away from rural uses and rural character. And the creative challenge for us in those situations is how to conserve or interpret a combination of built and landscape features in a way that communicates the history of the site while recognizing that this dramatic change is going to happen. But in the context of this rural heritage discussion today, I'm going to hand it back to Shelley to talk about the unique opportunities we've had to work with historic farmsteads that are actually still living in a rural.
Thanks, Emma. So I'm going to run through sort of 3 precedent projects, and then we'll wrap up and hand it back to Holly and Simporna. So the Goodlot Farm is a 28-acre property containing a brick farmhouse, 2 barns fronting the main road, and a series of smaller outbuildings and agricultural land. The current owners founded their hops farm in 2011, and in 2017 announced that they would be expanding their offering from just growing hops to also starting to brew beer. So we worked with the owners to renovate one of the barns on their property, converting the vacant building into a brewing facility. And so you can see sort of the before and after on the left and on the right. And the owners were able to leverage the existing assets on their site, so both the land as well as the hops, to draw users to the site, capitalizing on the community's growing interest in consuming local. The second property I want to mention is Cambium Farms in Caledon, and this property has operated as a seasonal event space from 2013 until 2017, at which time they approached ERA to help sort of upgrade the barn for modern and sort of expanded uses. Our work built on the programmatic upgrades required and focused really on how we could conserve and capitalize the cultural heritage value of the existing barn and the site. So we looked at how we could sort of highlight the elements of the barn, such as sort of the grandeur and size of the existing structure, the simple gable roof, the existing material palette of the vertical wood siding and the concrete silo, while simultaneously ensuring that any new additions would not impede the key landscape elements of the farmstead, including the building's prominence as a terminus view to the access road, which you can see in the image on the left. And as a backdrop to the brick farmhouse that fronts the road, which is sort of out of view of this image. And then finally, the Bright House Farm in Prince Edward County. So tying it back to some of the earlier conversations about Prince Edward County. So this 100-acre property historically was used as a dairy farm and is currently being converted into a multi-purpose venue and accommodation. And interestingly, sort of in lieu of simply choosing to pursue one offering for the property, the owners have chosen to sort of take the time and observe the region and the local tourist activity, and have curated an offering and a program for the site that's quite varied. And so this variety and diversity in program really establishes resilience for them as a business, and allows their business to sort of ebb and flow with society and the economy and sort of demands on their property. So our work sort of on the 3 case studies that I just mentioned has all relied on our culture of small framework. And this framework really focuses on engaging rural communities in conversations about post-resource-based economic and cultural development. And while we don't have the time today to sort of dive into the details of small, I'd be more than happy to chat about this offline at a later time. And so with that, I'll maybe stop screen sharing and hand it back to Holly and Sampurna.
Thanks, Emma and Shelley. Really appreciate you guys sharing this project or projects with us. I know like we are running a little behind the official schedule, but no worries. We still got lots of time here to go through some questions. We've prepared, Sampurna, Regan, and I have prepared a few questions for our panelists ourselves. Not sure if we'll get through all of them today, but I'm going to pass it over to Regan, and she's going to sort of facilitate this next sort of question and answer period, talking about some challenges and research and things like that. So Regan, over to you.
Awesome, thanks, Holly. So this is a good time if anyone in the audience has questions to start putting them in the chat, because we'll try to squeeze in some time for your questions at the end here. But our first question is, what is one challenge that you faced or come across in rural heritage conservation? And maybe how we'll do this is we'll start with Rob, because he kind of alluded to some challenges with the Losing Ground project. And then going from there, if you just kind of want to put your hand up, or if you know how to put your hand up in the Zoom menu, we can do that, and we'll just kind of go through all of the speakers. So a challenge, one challenge.
Boy, it's a challenge just to keep it to one, because the issues around rural heritage are really complex, and there are many, and they're integrated with just all of the other issues that rural Canada are facing about population, demographic shifts, economic shifts. There's bigger impacts that are having impacts on rural heritage in particular. But one I'll just pick one from the list. Access to the expertise and the expertise needed to lead so many projects. And I'm not just talking about the architects or engineers, but it's also having an understanding of how conservation can be done at the municipal planners in rural areas may not have that level of understanding or comfort with conservation. Building officials, building code officials, understanding how to adaptive reuse of barns and our agricultural buildings for new uses is a big challenge as well. So just the resources and capacity of understanding of heritage, I know is a big issue for many rural and remote areas.
Okay, awesome. And then maybe Emma or Shelley, if you want to kind of jump in here, I feel like there's a good transition from what Rob was saying.
I might let Shelley jump on that for a second, and then I have another distinct challenge actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can just all to say that we totally agree with what Rob just said. I mean, we face that often on all of our projects outside of sort of the GTA, right? And it's actually been really fascinating and kind of exciting and encouraging for us, some of the conversations that are starting to happen with other, you know, rural municipalities, and the excitement of some sort of municipal staff to start in these conversations and kind of really work through them together. That's not a challenge, so maybe I'll hand it off to Emma to speak to the challenge. But
yeah, and I mean, I think that the greatest challenge that I have been coming across as a planner at ERA lately, working on a number of these sort of peri-urban historic farmstead landscape sites. And I alluded to it in the presentation, and I apologize that these are not fully rural, but you know, there's a connection to these as rural agricultural landscapes. And meanwhile, planning policy at these municipalities is saying these are places to grow, and these are places that developers should be coming in and designing new neighborhoods. And it's really challenging when heritage listings and heritage designations and heritage planning is not kind of working in conjunction with the planning policy that's laying out these areas as targeted for growth, because there isn't sort of a concerted strategy to say, okay, but you've got 5 farmsteads along this right now, and do we want to continue telling that story? Are these going to get replaced? Are we going to list or designate them as they come forward for redevelopment? I think we would love to see some kind of broader strategic focus for how these places are going to change and how the stories continue to be told.
Awesome. So maybe we'll go to Karen now, because I see you had your hand up, and then Jennifer afterwards.
Well, I concur on them. There's so many challenges, but I think one of the things specific to Windermere that I think is worth recognizing is it's a seasonal community and a permanent community. Historically, it started as a farm rural community, and then seasonal cottagers came in, fishermen, whatever, it's evolved. And there was a very close relationship between seasonal cottagers and the original farm people that lived there, because they needed each other. And over the years, things have changed. And I think one of our challenges is keeping those or trying to reconnect the seasonal and the permanent, to realize like we are all in this together. And if we create meaningful relationships that with goals that everyone can feel comfortable with, then we feel like we can work towards the same goal. And it's the continuity over the years is challenging, I think, for any heritage preservation project, but specifically within this Windermere History Project, we want to send a message that what we do in our community does affect others, that we affect each other. And we are all looking at it. It gives us a sense of place, whether we're seasonal or permanent. We'd like people to look at it that way, and to really recognize the community history that's been there, and if we can keep it going forward.
Great. Now, just before we move to you, Jen, Barbara, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yes, we're the only archive in Muskoka. There's some in the libraries, but we are actually the only actual archive, although we have no training in it. We found that people are quite eager to share their photos and anything that they have written, and we have made copies of that. And if they want to leave it with us, we encourage them to leave it with us, and we're quite welcome to that too. It's mainly been just a gathering of information and saving it and making it available is what our whole purpose has been. I think that's mainly what we've done in our challenges.
And then Jen, we'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I was going to say something that's quite similar to what Karen was saying in terms of finding those common objectives, because I work from a regional perspective, and so there are 8 municipalities, and there are also different stakeholders, like from a tourism perspective, from an arts perspective. and there is from the economic development perspective. And so, and from the producers' perspectives, all these different either bodies, organizations, or they come together around the table. And if we can't determine those common objectives, it makes it very difficult to progress with the project and to bring new partners on board as well that can make projects happen. So that's one of the common challenges, I think.
Right. Okay, thanks for keeping to one challenge. I think we have time for one more of our questions, which is great. And we're looking for advice you'd have for those who are interested in pursuing a career in rural heritage planning. And if you guys just want to wave, we can just we'll go to you next if that works, or the putting your hand up is also good. All right, Rob.
I'll just jump in quickly. Do it. We need people, students in our rural planning. We are living in a moment that is so fascinating. There's so much happening in thought about conservation more generally, and about the link between environment and cultural heritage, how we can tell different stories about these places, both in urban and in rural settings. There are big challenges still ahead, and I'm going to sneak in another challenge. I mean, right now we're seeing huge infrastructure funding, for example, spreading urban areas. We were talking both Shelley and Emma were talking about these peri-urban areas in southern Ontario, but for much more remote areas, the opportunities are more difficult. But in these areas, there's a risk that the bad practices of urbanism are going to be spreading into rural areas, with corridors of rapid transit and so on. So I think we really need young urban planners and rural planners to understand how we can meet those densification objectives that you guys, that Emma, on your screen, that third option when you have the high density. So many of these smaller communities near large cities are going to be forced to densify. So how can we do that in appropriate ways that don't wreck what's so special about these rural heritage areas and these heritage landscapes? And we need smart young brains. So do it. That's my word.
Awesome. I think I saw a couple other hands. Yeah, Karen, if you want to go.
Sure. I mean, I look at it probably bizarrely, because it's not like this has suddenly appeared, rural heritage or the importance of, but I think more than ever, it's kind of like the new frontier. I think to the earlier point of there's a lot of exciting things happen. I think there's curiosity. We have greater access to information. We have communities that are getting into the arts, the festivals, the community theater. And, to circle back to Barb's, the absolute relevance of these archives and the community history. When people understand their history, they're much more willing to support what's there. And I think that really can be the bridge. So, again, it's that linking the past with a very specific structure of data, and which ACO, I think, brings to the equation. And for Windermere, and like many communities, I think the arts and that sense of we can create a community that people celebrate and feel part of. So I think there's so many areas for someone interested in rural heritage. I mean, just recognizing how they all come together is probably the biggest thing. So,
Barb, did you want to add on to that?
I really think maybe what should be on the curriculum, maybe of grade 7s and 8s, is there one class, just one class, their local heritage, to get them interested, to get them involved in the thought that things have happened before, and some idea about their own little area. And I don't think that's in there at the moment. That's one point I think is important.
That's a really good suggestion. Jen, did you want to chime in?
I just want to add that if you have an idea, I think you have to talk about it, and you have to get it out there, because oftentimes also, you might think of something and it's like, oh, I don't know if I can make this happen, but grand projects and things come, they come to life because, you've thought of something, but somebody else. Great innovation doesn't happen when it's just one person. So I think there has to be, no fear, and go out there and talk about your idea, because when other people hear about it, then they kind of embark, and it becomes easier to tell the story, and more people will come into, come onto the project with you. So there are many projects and many stories to tell, I think. So yeah.
Shelley or Emma, did you have any suggestions?
Maybe I'll do a maybe pessimistic one. I don't know if I would call it pessimistic, but it's more that, if you're graduating as a planner and you are looking for maybe public sector work in municipalities, I think it's worth thinking through. What types of challenges am I interested in working through? And do I want to be in a rural area that is likely going to be experiencing dramatic economic change in the next little while? Do I want to be in a rural area that's probably not going to see a huge amount of land use change in the next while? And those are things to keep in mind, because we have rural areas that are experiencing dramatic change. And if that's not sort of your jam, and particularly suburban expansion is not your jam, it's worth keeping in mind, I think.
Shelley, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, not really, but I suppose that I could say that, it's interesting what Emma just said, and that it makes me think of Prince Edward County, for example, where we're actually doing quite a lot of work and starting to have really interesting and fascinating conversations with the municipality there. And I think that, these municipalities, like I mentioned earlier, they're evolving and changing and responding to sort of all the change around them. And so, like Rob was saying, this is a really amazing time to sort of be in this world and in this conversation specifically about rural heritage, right? Because so much is happening right now. So yeah, to just echo Rob, just do it. Get, find a job or pursue that passion, and there'll be something great at the other end.
Awesome. Rob, did you want to?
I'd jump back in just quickly, because one of the challenges of this field is that we're using the word rural very broadly. And one of the things that we saw from our survey across the country, what defines rural heritage is very different from one region of this country to the other. And what I was really interested in, and this was the work that Sampoorna did with us when she was with us, was understanding that we often equate agricultural heritage with rural heritage. And I think us Southern Ontario folk are sort of, it's a bias that we have. But when you actually look at statistically, number of employment and so on, agriculture is like the third most important part of, and it has been for decades and decades in most rural areas in Canada. It's service industry, it's industrial and manufacturing. So I think for new people coming into the field, understanding that there are lots of different rural and remote kinds of communities and rural heritage that each has their challenge. If you go further north into primary resource extraction towns or one industry towns, there's some really interesting challenges and great opportunities. Different areas in Canada, when we did our survey, again, what defines the character of certain rural areas is very different. If talking about rural Newfoundland, and I go, Shelley and you guys with your culture of small and your outports work, there's amazing stuff happening in those areas. And the challenges are very different, but there's some really unique solutions coming out there. So I think for new people coming into the field, rural heritage provides you an opportunity to really stretch your brain and come up with some really innovative and unique opportunities to try new stuff, because there are lots of solutions to be had.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that kind of goes back to what Karen was saying about all of the different parts of heritage, and there's kind of something for everyone. So that's great to hear. So I'm going to pass it over to Sampoorna, who's been monitoring the chat. It looks like there might be a couple questions in there that she can go over and then wrap up today's session.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Are you able to hear me properly? Okay, perfect. So we have a question from Amy Barnes, and she says, I'd love to hear thoughts on how value changes or doesn't change if the farm is no longer in operation and the original fields have been sold off for new subdivision development. So yeah, Emma, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yes, I would love to.
Great question, Amy Barnes.
Yes, such a great question. And it's something that we really are working through all the time. And I think that the biggest question that keeps coming up for us is, are there, like from our perspective, these are sort of built and landscape features that you could conserve to tell these stories, because these are histories that in theory are valued by people. But when we're talking about places like Milton or Whitby or Vaughan or Markham, there's this question that to interpret these and new developments. There's a question that keeps coming up for me about, are there people here who value the agricultural heritage in these communities? Is this a story that we are telling just because these exist and they're there now? Or have the communities changed in such dramatic ways that there actually isn't the sort of value that people feel, and the value in conserving kind of the features of these places is maybe not there for the people who are going to be in these communities? So that's one question. I think the other key question is, we're always kind of thinking through, is there a purpose to saving this house or this driveway if you're also not talking about the practice of agriculture that occurred on these sites, the sort of economic driver that agriculture once was in these communities? So an idea that we keep playing with and keep suggesting to clients, and we'll see if it ever plays out one day, is the idea of interpretation through community garden, food production, fruit trees like orchards. And we're not really getting any bites on that right now, but I think there are really interesting opportunities in the public spaces in these new communities to continue telling stories of agricultural production. And I will keep you posted if somebody bites.
Did anyone else want to add to that question? Okay.
I think.
Go ahead, Rob.
I think just very quickly. I think values are always in evolution. Places have been evolving. How agricultural practice has been done has continued to evolve. So I think, but you're right that when the massive change that would come from the end of the use and redeveloping it is such a huge shift. But I think we also have to remember that there always was an evolution as well, and seeing that as a continuity, it doesn't deny what you're talking about when we're talking about tearing all the barns down and redeveloping it for a subdivision where there's a huge loss. But as Emma said, telling the story is part of it. Is that enough? I think that's where the discussion has to happen within the community, and figuring out how that can be, what the best parts of that evolution, and how managing that evolution to the next phase can be done as gracefully and respectfully as possible.
I'd like to comment, I've found this absolutely fascinating. All your presentations have been absolutely brilliant. And, it certainly gives, I think, Barb and I some good take-home information. It's been absolutely fascinating. Thanks for putting this on and allowing us to participate in it.
Yeah, I just thought I would add I think it's been interesting to hear from, such a diverse group. We have the architect and the planning view, and we have, the national lens. And then we've got really, when Rob was talking about creating these stories and these narratives, that's what Jennifer is doing. That's what Barb and Karen are doing. They're creating these connections between people and place. And I think that's really important for the work that Rob, Shelley, and Emma are doing. So it's kind of nice to see all of those connections being made. Yeah, were there any other questions there, Sampurna?
Yes, there are a few more questions. I'm just going to bring up something that was said at the start of the chat, and it was a comment from Cynthia, and she was admiring the PopSilos project, and she said it would be so nice to see this on the remaining grain elevators in across the prairie. So I wanted to ask maybe if you had some advice for scaling this project up to the prairies.
Well, I'd love to do that. I'd love to bring the PopSilos project to do some painting on all kinds of structures that that would help to conserve, you know, what's there, the structures that are there now, and we give them a new life, basically. It's something that if I have advice on how to do it, well, the first thing is to talk to partners and get a team, and talk to the municipality and talk to whoever is in charge from an arts perspective. And then I think also from the producer's perspective, that's what we did, is just to get all the right people around the table. But if you know anybody that's interested in supporting the idea, I'd greatly take that on as a challenge.
Wonderful. I think so. There was a few more questions, but I think I'll just wrap it up with the last one, which is kind of why a lot of us are here today. It's a question from Sam Willick, and he asks, she asks, sorry, what advice would you have for students trying to get involved in heritage projects while in university? So whoever wants to jump on that, just give a wave.
A shout out to the ACO, perhaps. I'll just shout out to the ACO, who does a great program, the Next Gen, which doing great work. I'll leave it at that. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. I was going to bring up ACO. You know, we were able to get grants for the Windermere History Project for two periods of time over the last 2 years to help get this project going. So that's great. And the Next Gen is fabulous so I think if you're interested in heritage architecture, Next Gen at ACO is fabulous.
Go ahead, Shelley.
Sorry, I might beat you to it. I was just going to say that, you know, we're at ERA, we're always sort of interested in hearing from people who are excited about the field and curious to kind of dabble or work in the field. And so, you know, we do take on students, not all the time, but there are sort of programs that roll through annually. And so, you know, if anything sort of resonated with you today and there's kind of an interest in reaching out to MRI, feel free to follow up and we can sort of take the conversation from there. I don't know, Emma, if you were going to say the same thing or something different.
I was not. I was going to say something different. I was going to say that my first heritage job was through Young Canada Works grant and heritage organizations. And so I don't know if COVID is still making all of that possible, but check out Young Canada Works, and the person who hired me for that job is here today. So hello. And it was much appreciated, and I'm working my dream job now because of it.
Yeah, Young Canada Works, there are different funding programs, but I was going to mention it as well. I started with the ACO, but Young Canada Works is one that hires current students and interns. Unfortunately, the application round just ended but it's the organizations that apply for funding to hire students, but you'll be seeing jobs posting in the next, very soon, like in the next month or two, when all those organizations get their funding. And yes, in COVID, we actually received, because we administer that program for the federal government. We're one of the administrating bodies for that program. There was lots of money put into it last year, and we're hoping that, again, even more funding this year. So there will be lots and lots of heritage organizations that applied. We'll be hearing in the next month or two that they were successful or not. And so there will be job postings coming up very, very soon for Young Canada Works sponsored positions.
Perfect. You threw it to Kara and I threw it to you.
Perfect. Backhand.
It's awesome. It's cool to see how many of the speakers here actually connected while we reached out to all of you very independently. Anyways, we're a couple minutes past 6 p.m. So I think I'll just do a quick wrap up and first of all, a huge thank you to the panelists who joined us here today. It's been a rocky road trying to get this going during COVID-19 and a lot of technology issues and changes. So thank you guys all for your patience, and thank you for joining. So a big round of applause, virtual or otherwise, to our speakers today. I would also just like to thank Sampurna and Regan for all of their help. Sampurna will be taking over and hosting tomorrow's international session. So if you haven't signed up for that, it's at 10 a.m. tomorrow. I highly recommend you check it out. We'll be talking about similar topics, but on an international scale. So lots to learn. Thank you to our faculty support, Sylvia, Sarah Pura, and Sarah Epp. They were huge help in all of this. And thank you to all of you for coming. And yeah, I am going to kind of stick around for a few more minutes if you have any questions. And I'll talk with the speakers and see who's comfortable sharing their presentations and their contact information and such if you want to follow up on anything they talked about here today. So thank you everyone again, and take care.